the 20th annual Zarrow Mental Health Symposium, all things prevention. This is the Visionaries dinner. Who are the visionaries? Who are the visionaries? It's all of you. Visionaries about mental health, about access to care, better treatment, about people living in recovery in our community where everybody belongs. We welcome you here tonight. We thank you. We're in awe. We're honored at your presence. And it's an incredible thing. I'm going to talk just very briefly and get you to the people that you want to hear from. But I want to just talk for a minute about the history of the Zarrow Symposium. It started 20 years ago. Where did it start? Well, it started when Maxine and Jack introduced me to Dr. Walt Menninger, the head of the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas. And with Dr. Menninger and his staff, we began to dialogue with Mr. and Mrs. Zarrow and their family. We began to have, and the idea came up of a symposium. Now, I had to ask, what's a symposium? They said, it's a conference. And it's always been a symposium after that. And so what do we try to do with the symposium every year? What we try to do is always be willing to take on a cutting-edge topic or idea. So we're never satisfied. So it's not about the same-o. It's about trying to stay with and ahead, or at least, if we can, right behind the research and the study. There's a time when we didn't talk about mental illness and prevention. We do now. Prevention is very possible. It's going on. It's going on in our state. It's going on in all of our communities. It's going on in this country. And the Zarrow Symposium is about bringing these ideas right in here to Oklahoma, and you're a part of that. But just very briefly, so what I think about, I was sitting there thinking about what's the legacy of the symposium. Well, the legacy is about all the conversations that are going on in this room and earlier today at the conference, and it'll happen tomorrow. Yeah, it's the breakouts, it's the plenaries, it's the workshops, but it's also about people talking, all the conversations going on. What are we doing with the jail? We got to keep people with mental illnesses out of that jail. What are we doing with collaboration, all the ideas that are going on? Hey, did you read that paper? Have you looked at that research? That's the legacy of the Zarrow Symposium. So two little brief stories in getting to know this wonderful family, Maxine and Jack, and them befriending us and befriending me. When I came to this job, I didn't know them. It was actually Gail that introduced me to her mom and dad. And I'll never forget one time we were in a meeting over at Community Service Council, and we were talking about the fact that people who hadn't committed any kind of crime, they were ill, and they had to be and go through a commitment process, and they were being transported over to the courthouse in shackles and chains every day. And you remember that? And I got done with the meeting. I went back to my office, and my phone rang, and it was Mrs. Zarrow. And she said, Mike, I'm so upset about that. And I said, yeah, I am too, but I don't know what to do about it. She said, well, I'm going to talk to Jack, and he's going to call Judge Winslow, and we're going to get a meeting with the judge. And I thought, well, okay, how do you do that? So I get a call in about an hour from Nikki. She's here somewhere. I don't know where she's at. And she says, can you be at the Summit Club on Wednesday? This was the day before Thanksgiving. And I said, well, yeah, I can be there at noon. Okay. I didn't know what the Summit Club was, and I didn't know where it was. I did have an idea. I probably needed to get my coat and tie on. So we went there, and it started, and we were able to address that. And it was that's advocacy, you guys. That's advocacy. That's what this is all about. The other thing that catches the heart of Maxine and Jack was a time, and some of you have heard me tell this story, but most of you probably haven't, and that was driving around. We heard about some property, some housing. We wanted to go out and look at it, and Jack and Maxine drove their car over, picked me up at the office. It was a cold day. We went out and looked at this property, and we didn't like it. We were driving back, and we were talking, what have you, and we got back in town. We were looking at some apartments, and Maxine turned to Jack, her dear husband, and said, Jack, with all of our resources, we couldn't find housing for Kathy. What are people without the means and the resources we have supposed to do? And Jack said, we're going to raise the money and we're going to do it. So 20 apartment buildings later, 16 different neighborhoods, 850 units of housing for people affected by mental illness, getting them off the streets, out of the housing. That's what it's all about. So, Ms. Zarrow, I would like you to stand up for a minute, and I'd like us to let everybody honor you and thank you. And I know you miss your partner here, but you be up here and stand by us and let us all thank you. You okay, sweetie? Thank you all. So, what 20th anniversary would be? It would be amiss if we didn't have a little bit of a special announcement. So, tonight, this is a surprise to her. Gail knows about it. Her family knows about it. We're creating in their honor in the Maxine and Jack Zarrow Advocacy Center. So from now on, from this time forward, the Mental Health Association Oklahoma, that in our public policy efforts and all the things that we do around working on expansion to access to affordable mental health care and health care, affordable housing, reducing the need for hospitalizations and rehospitalizations, decreasing incarceration of people affected by mental illness and substance abuse, working for increased allocations of funding for mental health care and substance abuse treatment. From now on and beyond that, and by the way, from now on, the Zarrow Symposium will always have plenary or a breakout that will be in the name of this advocacy center, in the name of Maxine and Jack Zarrow Advocacy Center. So from now on, you're welcome, dear. Mwah. Now I'd like to introduce to my friend and my partner in advocacy, Maxine and Jack's daughter, Gail Richards, who we tear it up. And Gail.
I guess this is on. Okay. Good evening. My name is Gail Richards, and I'm Maxine and Jack Zarrow's daughter. I will be speaking on behalf of my mom. Mom would like to thank the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma for recognizing her and my late father for their advocacy for the mentally ill in Oklahoma and throughout the country. Mom would also like to thank her family and friends from all over who have come to share this with her. Her children, her grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, who we all hope are asleep when we get home, and her wonderful nieces and nephews. On a personal note, I only wish that my dad, Jack, and my brother, Scott, were here tonight to share in this award. My sister, Kathy, who has great courage in dealing with her mental illness, every day gives us all the courage to advocate for change through constant education about mental health. Our parents were great role models and taught us that it was our responsibility to advocate for those that are unable to advocate for themselves. Mother would also like to thank her good friends that are here with her tonight who have been by her side on this journey. Terry White, Commissioner of the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, Dr. Terry Klein, Oklahoma Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Commissioner of the Oklahoma State Department of Health. John Sullivan, Patrick Kennedy, Mike Brose for his friendship and leadership, and all those involved who support mental health issues and work in our community every day with the mentally ill. Once again, Mom and Dad, thank you for this great honor that you have bestowed upon them this night. Please enjoy the evening.
So tonight it's my pleasure to introduce to you Congressman John Sullivan. And, John and Judy, they've been friends of ours for a long time. But I remember that when I first met John, he was in the State House here in Oklahoma, and he came into my office. Actually, it was an individual who lives in recovery who brought him into my office. That was the first time I'd ever met John. And we began to dialogue and talk about mental health care needs, the needs for substance abuse treatment. And John used his position, and he recruited, he and John Bryant and Mike Thornbrew, these three Republicans from right around here in Tulsa, they all got together and they said, we're going to pass mental health parity in Oklahoma. And it just looked like an impossible battle. So with their leadership, with John's leadership, it passed the House and the Senate once, and it got vetoed. And the next year, they went back in, and they passed it again, bipartisan, again, and it got vetoed. And we got it really organized then, and it got passed again, and we had enough votes to override, and guess what? The governor signed it. We had mental health parity here in Oklahoma. So John then gets elected to Congress, and boy, we were up there right after him. And we're here, we're right behind you, John. We're with you, man. The first thing he did, he said, I'm going to reach across the aisle. By the way, I think we need a little more of that. He reached across the aisle to Patrick Kennedy, and those two began to work together, communicate together. Together, they brought a congressional field hearing on mental health parity right here to Oklahoma, here in Tulsa, to get and hear witnesses come forward to get it on the congressional record. So in 2008, October 3rd, 2008, it passed, and we had mental health parity in this country. And Patrick Kennedy, John Sullivan, you all need to understand these were the two guys that really made it happen. So, John, come up. I want to have you come up. Where's John at? There he comes. Please join me in welcoming John Sullivan.
Thank you. Thank you. That's nice.
Thank you, buddy. It's on you.
Well, thank you, and good evening. It's an honor to be here tonight to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Zarrow Mental Health Symposium, an amazing legacy of Maxine and Jack Zarrow. As I recall, the last time Patrick Kennedy and I were here in Tulsa was 2008, when we co-hosted that U.S. congressional field hearing on mental health parity. That was a pivotal moment in eventually making Oklahoma health insurance plans provide equal coverage for mental illness. And when I first started getting involved in mental health issues, I didn't know much about it. I was in the State House, like Mike was talking about, and they were talking about this mental health parity and some of these bills, and people were talking about just crazy people. That's what I thought they were talking about. And Maxine and Jack Zarrow came down and talked to me about it, and they were responsible for getting me involved in this. I would not have done it. I would not have been involved in this if they hadn't come and talked to me. And not only did they talk to me and tell me how important this was there's lost productivity in the workforce. 1 out of 5 Oklahomans suffers from mental illness. All of us know someone that has it. They also shared a story about their daughter that suffers from mental illness. And that meant a lot to me that they did that. They continued to work with me and help me and encourage me and teach me along the way. And I owe a lot to you for what you've done. And you've done a great job for this. And we wouldn't be here today without you, Maxine and Jack. Thank you. You know, when I look back at my congressional career, you know, people go, what was the most significant thing you've ever done? Well, tell us about a big bill that's really exciting. And some of the things, you know, we vote on, they're kind of meaningless. They don't really go anywhere, or they don't mean much. But one of the greatest, and I take the most pride in, that I enjoyed the most, is working with Patrick Kennedy in Congress across the aisle, and that's not a bad thing to do. You get things done doing that. Working across the aisle with a passionate crusader for the mentally ill, and that's Patrick Kennedy. No one works harder in Congress. No one's more passionate about it. He shouted from the rooftops every single day in Congress, fighting for the mentally ill. And it was infectious. He would tell me, John, you know, we talk about why should these people be treated like dogs when they have a biologically based mental disorder that's no fault of their own? Just like someone that has diabetes or heart disease. Why should we treat them any differently? And Patrick would always say, John, this is a civil rights issue. They have rights. And I respect Patrick a great deal for that. He's a hero. He's a good man, and I like him very much. One of the things Patrick and I share is we're both Irish, Catholics, drunks. We're both in recovery. So it means so much to me that I'm here to celebrate 20 years of a conference that's helped thousands of people find and maintain their own recovery. And I know Patrick does too. So I'd now like to introduce my fellow congressman and more importantly, my good friend, the Honorable Patrick Kennedy.
The best, thank you. Now, I have to tell you the truth, if we're going to be, honest here tonight. When I came out to Tulsa at John's invitation, I knew I was coming to the buckle of the Bible Belt. I knew I was coming from liberal blue Northeast into the heart of the Sea of Red in Middle America. And so I love John Sullivan so much that I said to him, John, now listen, if it helps you, I'll come to Oklahoma and tell everybody what a rotten SOB you are and how I don't want to have anything to do with you, if that'll help you get reelected. So whatever helps John, if I can tell everybody how I truly feel, which is that I love him like a brother, although I'll just have killed his future in politics in Oklahoma by saying that. I just want to say there was one Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee who voted the right way. And for those of us who know the legislative process, it's not the final vote that counts. It's all of those amendments that keep the integrity of the final bill intact, that are the tough votes, because most people don't know what phantom networks are. They don't know what medical utilization review and applying more onerous medical necessity criteria, blah, 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 blah. Meaning, if you aren't really in this issue, you can vote no and get a lot of support from the insurance community if you do that. And then, be okay at the end and throw your vote for parity at the end and say, oh, I voted for parity. But those of us who are in the fight know that the real work is working in the devil is in the details. It's trying to strengthen the bill as it goes forward. And you can't imagine how many votes where John Sullivan was the solitary Republican on energy and commerce voting for amendments that strengthened the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. So for that, you ought to know John is the real deal when it comes to mental health. So John and I had the honor of serving with a guy named Dan Boren. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Boren at all out here, Oklahoma. But we, the Kennedy family, like to consider ourselves the Borens of the Northeast. And, you know, I went up to Dan when he got elected, and I said, listen, Dan, this is just undemocratic. I said, I can't believe in this great country that people like you get elected simply because of your last name. I just think it's outrageous in this great country that people think they can get elected on their last name. So, of course, I got elected to the State House in Rhode Island at the age of 21 as the youngest member of the State House. And then I got elected to the United States Congress at 27 as the youngest member of Congress. And then I got elected at 30 to be in the Democratic leadership. And you know what? None of it had to do with my last name being Kennedy whatsoever. It was all my good looks and personality just rocketed me to the top. So I am so honored to be here tonight and had a chance to visit with Maxine, not only tonight, but both her and Jack were at that hearing that we did on Parity here in Tulsa in 2008. And what a terrific tribute to call it the Jack and Maxine Advocacy Award, because what we want to talk about tonight is not just all the services that need to be put in the right place in order to get the optimal outcomes for those of us who we know need optimal outcomes, but it's being politically active, and I mean that in the big sense, where you go out and educate people who are in positions of power. And thankfully here in Oklahoma, you have the two Terrys, Terry White and Terry Klein, who have just been fantastic advocates on your behalf in Oklahoma. I hope I don't ruin their reputations either by saying that. But Mary and I served with John. We are good friends. It's possible to be friends with people even if you don't share the same ideology. So I just want to state, we wouldn't have passed Parity had it not been a bipartisan effort. So I had the honor of having Jim Ramstad be my primary co-sponsor, my dad, who took the place of our great late Paul Wellstone, who forever will be the person that we always thank for his original leadership on this cause. And when he passed away, my dad took over the bill, and it was the Wellstone-Domenici bill, but it was really one of the great honors of my life to have a chance to work on that. It was President George W. Bush who signed it into law so that we're safe tonight. This is a bipartisan issue because you know what? Mental illness doesn't know the difference between Democratic families and Republican families. So I am so honored to have been part of this struggle, but I want to kind of set the record straight. You got me by default, which means that, as I said, I was the youngest member of Congress from the smallest state, and I was in the minority party when I got to Congress. So I was the lowest guy on the totem pole. Now, for those of you who know about the way the legislative process works, if it's a really popular piece of legislation, well, you got to be around a long time, like my dad was for nearly 50 years, and then you can be the one that sponsors the legislation. And you're like Senator Boren, and you're like a preeminent, like one of the grand bulls of the Senate. Yes, then, you know, Senator Boren can put his name, because no one's going to hold a candle to Senator Boren. They go, okay, yes, okay, you're the senior guy. But just to show you what stigma means in politics, when I got to Washington and I wanted to support this parity, I thought I was going to be co-sponsor senator way down. You know, there's 435 members of the House. I thought I might make it in the 200s if I was lucky. If I got there early enough, I might make it in the top half of the numbers of members of Congress who would sign the bill. Much to my surprise, the clerk of the House said, Congressman Kennedy, if you want to be the primary sponsor, I don't see anyone else out there who wants to sponsor the bill. Can you imagine a bill that simply says the brain is part of the body? How radical a notion is that? That our healthcare system ought to treat illnesses of the brain just as it does every other organ of the body. That's what the bill says. Can you imagine the youngest member from the smallest state in the minority party gets to be the champion of it because there weren't a lot of other members that wanted the words mental health and addiction, after their name. God forbid someone would ask, well, why are you supporting this legislation? And have them really look into your eyes and try to figure out if they couldn't find out whether you had a mental illness or addiction. So, and this is absolutely the case. It went all the way to the end when we finally passed the Parity bill. I'll give you one anecdote. I am not only the sponsor of the mental health parity law. I'm like that Hair Club for Men guy. You ever see that ad where he says, I'm the founder of Hair Club for Men, and I'm also a client too. So I am the sponsor of Parity, and I'm also a consumer of mental health services. So during one of my jaunts to treatment, it was very publicized. Like many of us who are being treated or have been treated, we often have to have run-ins with the law before we get health care. And that's a whole other subject. But yes, I got arrested too, and then I went off to go to treatment. Well, when I came back, even though everybody knew I'd been struggling with bipolar and addiction, everybody was kind of coming up to me and like taking me aside and telling me their own family stories. Colleagues of mine in Congress. And I can tell you there were quite a few of them who told me these, harrowing stories in their own family. Fast forward to when the Parity bill came up to a vote. I looked at the board, and many of these same members who told me stories about how their daughters had eating disorders and had been hospitalized a number of times, who told me how their father had taken a shotgun and committed suicide in their house. I mean, hair-raising stories. These same members voted no on mental health parity when it came onto the floor in 2008. I will never betray their confidence. But I just want you to know that is what we're still dealing with, because I would go up to them afterwards. I said, we had a good conversation. I want to know how it is that you voted the way you did. And they said, Patrick, you can vote that way because you're from the Northeast. I'm from the Midwest. I can't vote that way. Because you see, in my part of the country, they look at these issues as moral issues, not medical issues. They look at these as issues of character, not chemistry. And furthermore, if I were ever to vote for that parity law, I'd have the press start inquiring as to whether I have a family or personal connection to the cause. And I honestly, Patrick, cannot subject my family to the scrutiny that will come if they ever find out that my family member suffered. Because it will be adding insult to injury if the press finds out what my personal story is. That's what I faced amongst my colleagues, your representatives in Congress, because they're so scared about the perception of these illnesses and the political risks that people take when they stand up for those with mental illness. So all the more reason that Jack and Maxine deserve this special honor of advocacy, because the heart of us improving the mental health system will be through advocacy. Because you see, both of the Terrys are not going to be able to realign the incentives here in Oklahoma to pay for outcomes. And all of you who are in the field know what I'm talking about. Pay for outcomes rather than paying for just services. If we don't have the kind of advocacy out there that is enlightened and that tells members of the legislature and educates the governor and others that this is in our enlightened self-interest to manage to reallocate the resources so that we really do improve not only quality care, but we improve the cost of care right now, which, as you all know, if we ever added up the costs of care, we never do. We never add the law enforcement budget, the probation budget, the juvenile justice budget, the human services budget, the prison budget. But those, if you ever added all those costs in and then really evaluated what the return on investment would be, which your conference is now investigating about prevention, you would see measurable return on investment by supporting the initiatives that you have supported out here in Oklahoma. What a terrific job you've done with housing. Give yourselves a great round of applause for all the housing. No one says housing's mental health treatment. What do you know that we don't know? My friends, this is the kind of agenda that we need to promote, not only here in Oklahoma, but all over the country. We need to take those best practices, like you've demonstrated by providing stable housing, how you've reduced the amount of hospitalizations or incarcerations. We need to provide that to other states. And so that's why I'm so happy that you're working on realigning incentives to start to pay for things like integrated care. Who would imagine you've got the healthcare system here and then you got to go down the hall for the mental health system? That doesn't make any sense. And that's still how we pay for mental health today. So a little anecdote. John mentioned that I'm in recovery too. So I left Congress. I go to my new home in Brigantine, New Jersey. By the way, it's 3 miles from downtown Atlantic City. Talk about a serenity stopper for those of you who are in recovery with me. I mean, you've got every temptation in the world bombarding you at every moment. So I have the longest period of continuous sobriety in Atlantic City, New Jersey. That's just to say it right out front. So I go to my new doctor. I walk in. I said, doctor, yeah, I've got to start here. I'm in recovery from addiction and been taking these medications for bipolar disorder. I've also got cholesterol, and I take, the Lipitor, and yeah, my tummy is upset sometimes, so I take Nexium. I got, the asthma, which, is managed pretty well. I got my Ventolin, my Advair, and so forth. So wouldn't you know, the whole doctor's appointment is asking me how many times I take my fast-acting inhaler versus my long-acting, and does it interfere with my sleep and all the rest. And by the way, I'm like all the way through the exam. I'm on the way out the door, and I said, Doc, you saw that surgery that I had on my back? Sometimes I get some real pain, and I need some breakthrough meds for that. So do you think you could write me a script for Oxycontin? 20 milligrams fine, 80 pills. That's just enough for me to get breakthrough. I'll come back if I need more. He broke out his prescription pad. I'm not kidding you. I mean, he knew that my cousin Caroline was ambassador to Japan, which means he Googled me a little bit before I came in. He had to have known that Patrick Kennedy, recovering addict, champion of Parity, and he was about to fill out a script because his training was not to ask any of his patients about their, emotional health, their mood disorder, their addiction. My friends, this is Stone Age stuff. The fact that we're still have a system where the medical community does not do a checkup from the neck up is you should find pretty shocking. The fact that obstetricians and gynecologists don't ask about sexual trauma. The fact that orthopedists don't ask about whether you were inebriated when you broke your leg falling down the stairs. That don't ask about how you got that contusion when you get wheeled into the ER. This is old-fashioned stuff. This needs to change. So, in any event, another quick story about that. I was putting together the ping pong table for my nephews and nieces, and my immediate reaction is to try to catch the ping pong table when it's falling, and of course it caught my finger and took the top of my finger off. So I was like, oh my God. I said, I can't wait to get the pain pills. This is going to be, I've got an excuse now. So I go to the ER. The nurse comes up to me and says, are you allergic to anything? And somewhere in the back of my head, I said, oh yeah, I'm allergic to opiates. She should have seen the look on her face. She never heard that before. No one ever said to her, I'm allergic to opiates. They go into the hospital to get opiates. No one goes in and says, don't give me any opiates. Wouldn't you know, after that exam, the doctor sends me off with a script and a jar full of Percocets. And I'm not kidding you. Of course, that's Atlantic City, and that's like the standard protocol to get people out of the ER. So I went to my 12-step support group the next day, and I told this story because I got to tell people if I'm in, jeopardy, I got to keep my support close. And I told the story how I said that I'm allergic to opiates. The following week, one of my support group members was celebrating her anniversary, and she shared that she came the closest she's come to breaking her sobriety when she had a similar experience to me, and she went into the ER, and they asked her whether she was allergic to anything, and she remembered what Patrick had said in the rooms about how he had said he was allergic to opiates. She blurted it out, and she said, Patrick, if you hadn't told your story that day, I wouldn't be back in these rooms celebrating sobriety because I wouldn't have known what to say. My point is that that's the miracle of recovery. Anyway, so enough about me. So I go, we introduced the Parity law. We had to do the hearings over and over. 2008 rolls around, and we passed Parity. Not because we woke up one day and said, wouldn't it be great if we all treated each other with dignity and respect? Wouldn't it be great if those with mental illness were not discriminated against? Here's how it really happened. So my dad had just had brain surgery and was convalescing back at his house, and he was still like my guy. If I wanted to get anything done, as you know, Senator Boren, there was no one better than calling my dad. And so I called my dad. I said, our bill, H.R. 1424, the Parity law, is sitting on the Senate desk. We need them to move the bill. What am I going to do? So my dad, while he was away, had Chris Dodd take his seat on the Health Committee. But most of you may recall the name Chris Dodd is associated with banking. That's because Chris Dodd was chairman of the Banking Committee. So my dad called Chris Dodd. I talked to Chris Dodd. Chris Dodd says, I know how I'm going to get your Parity bill to pass. And I said, tell me. He said, I've got this thing called TARP, the Toxic Asset Relief Program. And in the House, you guys voted it down last week, and the stock market collapsed 6,000 points in the period of 10 minutes when the House of Representatives voted down the original TARP. So you know what's going to happen, Patrick? Everybody's going to want to come back and finally vote for that thing because our economy's about to go into the next Great Depression. I've got just the solution. I said, okay, Chris, you're the expert. So, of course, we came back the next week. All the members of Congress now wanted to save the economy because they recognized the critical nature of it. They voted for TARP. TARP came over to the Senate, and Chris Dodd put the $800 billion bailout for the biggest banks on H.R. 1424, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And it proceeded to pass right away. So the problem with all of that is we passed the law, but no one knows about the law. Nobody knows about the law. I mean, you know, those of you who are active in the community know about it, but the general public doesn't know. And the insurance industry and many others just hope you don't find out about the law. So I have tried to think about how when I left Congress, you know, and like with John Sullivan, no one returns our phone calls anymore. You know, you leave Congress and it's like, hello, who are you? So I had to figure out what am I going to do to get people back together. So I recognized the year I left Congress was the 50th anniversary of my uncle's presidency. So I called my cousin Caroline, and I said, Caroline, you know, I really can't get anything done on this mental health stuff, but, you know, your dad did some amazing things, and two things in particular I think would be great galvanizing points for us to unite the mental health community. She said, what are you thinking about? I said, well, I'd really like to do something big around the anniversary of your father swearing in, you know, the new frontier. That was John F. Kennedy's time in office. And I'd like to say that we get all these neuroscientists together and we repurpose the new frontier for today, you know, to be about the last medical frontier, which is brain research. And Caroline said, Patrick, I love your enthusiasm, but you know what? We've already got the president and the speaker and the majority leader. We're already doing an event, so sorry, we can't do that. And I said, oh, that's too bad. She said, but you know what? You can have May 25th. And I said, Caroline, you're going to have to fill me in here. What was May 25th? And she said, that's when Daddy said that we would go to the moon. And I said, Caroline, perfect. So I sent an invitation to all the NIH directors in charge of the brain, all the leading neuroscientists and the different disease groups, autism and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and epilepsy and ALS, and on and on. There's 900 of them if you haven't counted them all. And I brought them all to the John F. Kennedy Library, and I said, John F. Kennedy said we should go to outer space. If he were alive in this generation, he'd say, let's go to inner space. Let's recognize those neuroscientists out there who are helping to discover how our brains work as the new astronauts for our generation, the people that we ought to be celebrating and really toasting because they're the ones that are going to bring the answers to the very disabilities that plague every single family in America. And right after that, I had the heads of the NIH and the National Institutes of Mental Health said, Patrick, I've never been called an astronaut before, but I like it. That's what they said. They liked it. They said they grew up watching the Apollo program, and they thought they were fascinated with the idea that we would try to reach beyond what we knew and try to learn more. And they said, and you know what? This is what we need to do. So I figured because I used the space analogy, I'd get the longest-serving NASA administrator to come in, talk with all these neuroscientists to try to come up with what would the NASA program be if we would actually bring all this science together. And we had Dan Golden come in, and he told us, it's all systems analysis. So I said, systems analysis? What are you talking about? And they said, Patrick, it's getting common data elements so that the genome marries the phenome and connects the proteome, the metabolome, and the connectome, all in between. And I said, okay, whatever you say. Because you see, I don't know that neuroscience stuff, but I do know political science. And what political science is about is connecting the dots. And the thing that we are really in jeopardy of losing the opportunity to make further advances in brain research is because we're all so siloed in our brain research. It's all siloed by the diagnosis, when in fact we all know that we live on a spectrum of disorders, meaning, the treating the traumatic brain injury patient is going to be useful to helping to treat your grandchild with autism, is going to be helpful to treating your aunt with Alzheimer's, who also may have Parkinson's-like symptoms. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's the brain, it's the brain, it's the brain. And yet we divide it all up in these very neat, homogeneous silos, and then no one talks to each other, when the answers to understand brain research is like looking at the galaxy and trying to find the patterns and where they all align. So I got all the NIH directors to commit to me as a former member of Congress. I wasn't paying their bills anymore. They committed to me to put together a 10-year roadmap to reduce the burden of illness due to brain illnesses. And we had the provost at Harvard, Steve Hyman, and they all did it on their own time. But I'm just trying to point out to you that I barely made it out of college. Okay, I barely made it into college. The point is don't assume that just because it's obvious to you that we have a fractionalized system and that it's so obvious that the mental health can't be segregated from the overall health, and the mental health can't be segregated from substance use disorders. And frankly, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities also need mental health, because too often they're in silos where their anxiety and their depression and their addiction is not treated in the IDD community. In other words, there is an absolute fragmentation and siloization, not only in the research, but in the delivery of care in the mental health world. And that our real answer is by working together. And the exciting thing about the times that we live in today is that we have the tools today to work together like never before. So I'll just conclude with a few words about President Kennedy, because he was the first president to sign a major mental health bill, the Community Mental Health Act of 1963. And at the signing of that bill, he said, the mentally ill need no longer be alien to our affections or beyond the help of our communities. And I know so many of you are really passionate advocates, and we always try to come up with the elevator speech, what do we need to do in mental health? Like, it's too many things. We got to save kids, we got to save the seniors, we got to get, mental illness, we got to get severely mentally ill, we got to get prevent, we got to get substance. President Kennedy nailed it, in my humble opinion, when he said that, because he hit the heart of the problem when he said the mentally ill are alien to our affections. That's true. They're still alien to our affections. But he said, but they're not beyond the help of our communities. Communities. I'm not saying healthcare system. I'm not saying mental health care system. I'm emphasizing community, because the only way to adequately treat anyone with a mental illness or substance use disorder or intellectual disability is through community. It's doing the housing like you've done in Child and Family Services, and Gail, what a great job. It's bringing together the kinds of services in support of employment and supportive living services, because if you do that, you reduce your medical spend. And that's where I come back to. It's all about systems and re-incentivizing the systems to talk to one another. John F. Kennedy went on to be known for his civil rights speech as well, which I think, frankly, also captures the challenge we have with those suffering from mental illness. When he spoke about African Americans and other minorities in this country, and he said, "Who amongst us would trade the color of their skin and be content with those who counsel patience and delay?" In other words, you had lots of people today say, oh, we'll get to that mental health thing, give healthcare reform some chance to get going, and then we'll do this over here. If it's your loved one who can't get access to a physician or treatment or care or housing and is suffering, how many of us would be willing to walk in their shoes and be satisfied with the status quo that says it's okay to wait? It's okay for us to create the new asylums in this country, which are our jails and prisons. It's okay to reinstitutionalize the mentally ill in the most horrific circumstances. If you have a condition like psychosis, to put someone in a jail like we do the mentally ill in this country is an abomination. It's a crime against our own humanity that we put people in those circumstances. So he had it right. Who amongst us would trade places? And so finally, I just want to leave on something kind of inspirational because, my family has been known for saying inspirational things, and I've made a lifetime of quoting them. But just last year, my brother Ted went down to South Africa and received, just before Nelson Mandela passed, met with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela says, and South Africa gave my dad the highest civilian honor of anybody that they can give an honor to. And Nelson Mandela said to my brother, your father was with us on Robben Island. So all I need, when my brother came back and told me that, I burst into tears. I remember when he was fighting the apartheid bill, and they had to override a presidential veto. It was unheard of in American history that the Senate did that. And but what it meant to me was the fact that his brother, my Uncle Bobby, was there in '66 and made the most famous kind of quotable speech that Robert Kennedy ever made when he spoke to a group of Cape Town South Africans that never thought there was anything real to the notion that the day would ever change where apartheid would no longer be the law of the land and their reality. And he said, each time a person stands up or acts to improve the lot of others, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And coming from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples can knock down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And what that meant to me is you don't have to be one person to change the world, but like in this room tonight, a sea of people all doing the right thing. It used to be where, I'm sure 20 years ago, Maxine, when you got this symposium started, you couldn't have imagined that you'd be growing like you're growing today. And it's such a great credit to Mental Health America and all the fantastic support that you've gotten from people in this room, that this is really growing even faster now. And it's a sign that when we think we can't make a difference, that if enough of us show up, we can fill the room, Maxine. So I want to thank all of you for filling this room with love and hope and compassion for your sisters and brothers who, in their lifetime, if they're ever struck by a mental health issue, will have that much better chance of overcoming it because of the work that all of you have been doing over these many years. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. That was great. Very good. And as Patrick talked about in his amazing speech, he helped establish the nonprofit organization One Mind. One Mind is made up of a group of individuals who believe change is possible. They are passionate about the needs of the patient and use that as their motivation to continue their push forward on supporting mental health research.
Thank you, John. I just can't thank you on behalf of the Mental Health Association Oklahoma. We cannot thank you enough for your presence here tonight. And Patrick, thank you. It was wonderful. It reminds us is that this isn't out there. This is right here in our community, in our state, across this state, our rural areas, our urban areas in Oklahoma. We have a lot of work to do, but we've got a great start. Let's build off and continue to build on what Patrick and John have done, what Maxine and Jack and their family have done. We're all going to work together, and we're going to do some really amazing things on behalf of people affected by mental illness and substance abuse. Thank you all. I want to introduce to you Judy Alexander. Where is Judy? There she is. Come on up, Judy. I failed to mention that Judy Alexander and Karen Davis were our chairs of tonight's dinner. It's because of all of what they did and their leadership that this is happening tonight. Please join me. Yeah. All right,
Thank you, Patrick, for being here tonight. Boy, did our committee make the right decision. That was fabulous. We are thrilled. It was wonderful. Thank you. And thanks for never letting those people in the Capitol or the media forget that mental health matters. And thanks to each of you for being here tonight to celebrate 20 years of the Zarrow Mental Health Symposium. Here's to 20 more years. It's such an honor to join all of you in honoring Maxine and Jack Zarrow for their inspirational advocacy on behalf of Oklahomans whose lives have been touched by mental illness and homelessness. And a special thank you as we close the celebration. We have some very honored guests, the inspirational men and women of the Altamonte Bakery. They're over here at the entrance. For those of you who have never tasted their cookies, they are fantastic. The Altamonte Bakery is a commercial bakery selling cookies around Tulsa, but it's not just about the cookies. It's about building relationships between the congregation B'nai Amunah, volunteers, and partner bakers at the Mental Health Association Oklahoma's Altamonte Apartments. The bakers' work and productivity makes it possible for people to talk, for relationships to form, and for skills to be learned. The result is the best cookies ever. If you don't believe me, you're about to find out, because you'll get one on your way out the door tonight. And I'm not sure what flavor, and I'm really not happy that they started with their third one, the sugar cookies, because I have been eating them. We sell them in our own facility, as many of you do here. As you leave tonight, please enjoy the complimentary cookie. The Altamonte Bakers hope that you savor. It's not just a good cookie, a great cookie. It's about fellowship and everything that comes from having a good job and people who support their recovery. Thanks again, all of you, for being here, and have a safe trip home. Hope you enjoyed it.